The morning had started like any other in Willow Creek Estates, a quiet neighborhood that pretended to be peaceful while hiding more drama than a courtroom. The lawns were perfectly cut, the mailboxes freshly painted, and the HOA patrolled the streets like self-appointed royalty. At the center of that royalty was Karen Holt, the HOA president who treated every sidewalk crack and misplaced trash bin like a personal insult. But that morning wasn't about Karen. It was supposed to be about Eli, my 10-year-old son, my little boy, who, despite being born with a mobility disorder, carried more courage in his small frame than most grown men. He was in his wheelchair, dressed in his bright blue hoodie with the Navy SEAL logo I'd given him for his birthday. He called it his dad's shirt. Every time he wore it, he said it made him feel strong like me. I was overseas then, or at least supposed to be. My deployment had been cut short after a minor injury, and I decided to surprise Eli by coming home early. My wife, Sarah, had planned to take him out front to see the new garden she'd built around the mailbox, a simple project to help him enjoy the outdoors. She had no idea that today would turn into a nightmare that would change everything. Across the street, Karen stood with her clipboard, watching them like a hawk. She'd been harassing my family for months, complaining that Eli's wheelchair ramp didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic and that our new flowers were not HOA approved. The woman had once issued a written complaint because Sarah left the trash bins at the curb for 15 extra minutes. That morning, she stormed across the road in her usual fury, muttering something about violations and unapproved landscaping. Sarah tried to stay calm. She always did. But Karen had a way of crossing lines that most people couldn't even see. Eli, ever the peacemaker, rolled his chair forward and said softly, "Miss Karen, Mom said I could help plant flowers today. Do you want to see?" Instead of seeing the innocence in his eyes, Karen saw offense. She snapped something sharp about kids needing supervision and rules being rules. She leaned over the garden, trying to yank one of the newly planted posts that marked Eli's garden border. That's when it happened. The wheel of Eli's chair caught on a small rock as he tried to back up, and Karen, in her anger, shoved the post without looking. The motion startled him. The chair tipped, sliding sideways off the small stone edge by the driveway. Sarah screamed as Eli hit the ground, crying out in pain, the sound echoing through the entire street. Karen froze. Her face went pale, her hands shaking, but she didn't help. She just whispered, "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." Before she did the one thing that sealed her fate forever, she walked away. Neighbors came running. Sarah held Eli in her arms, trembling, begging for help. Someone called 911. Within minutes, the ambulance arrived, but so did I. When my Jeep roared up the hill and I saw the flashing lights, something inside me went cold. I leaped out before the engine even stopped. The medics were lifting my son into the stretcher, his face pale, but conscious, tears running down his cheeks. "Dad," he whispered weakly. She pushed my flowers. Sarah was shaking uncontrollably. Between sobs, she told me what had happened. Each word hit harder than the last. I looked across the street, and there she was, standing on her porch with that same clipboard, pretending she hadn't just changed the course of our lives. I didn't yell. I didn't charge. Years of discipline in uniform had taught me control, but there was a storm building behind my eyes that she couldn't begin to understand. As the ambulance pulled away, she finally called out, "It was an accident. You can't blame me for an accident." I turned to her, my voice low and steady. "Karen," I said, "I'm not here to blame you." Her expression softened slightly, maybe thinking I was going to forgive her. I took a step closer and added, "I'm here to end this." For the first time in her life, HOA, Karen looked afraid. And she had every reason to be. The hospital lights always have that same sterile hum, cold, steady, and merciless. I sat in the corner of Eli's room, the machine softly beeping beside him while Sarah slept in the chair by his bed. His arm was wrapped, his forehead bandaged, and the doctors said it would take months of therapy for his spine and legs to recover from the fall. They said he was lucky. Lucky. I'd heard that word too many times in combat zones, and I'd buried men who were lucky. When I stepped out of the room, I found Officer Daniels waiting for me in the hallway. Good man. We'd served together once, years back, before he traded the battlefield for the badge. He'd already taken Sarah's statement and had spoken briefly to Karen. She claims it was an accident, Daniel said. Says she didn't touch the chair, just the post. Did anyone see her? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He nodded. A couple of neighbors, and there's security footage from a Ring camera across the street. I haven't seen it yet. I clench my jaw. Get it? I'll wait. An hour later, Daniels called me into the precinct. The footage wasn't long, 35 seconds, maybe. It showed everything. Karen leaning over, yanking the border post, Eli trying to back up, her arm brushing the chair, and then the fall. She froze, stepped back, and left him there. No attempt to help, no call for assistance, nothing. That was all I needed. But it wasn't just about the push. It was what came after. I spent the next day digging into Karen Holt's history, every public record, every HOA filing, every police report she'd ever been involved in. What I found was worse than I imagined. Karen wasn't just cruel, she was calculated. She'd been reported 3 times in the last 5 years for harassment and intimidation. 2 elderly residents had moved out after she threatened them with fines over unapproved porch lights. One family filed a lawsuit when she entered their backyard without permission to inspect fence color compliance. And all of it had somehow been dismissed because Karen was connected. Her brother-in-law was the county zoning commissioner, and her HOA lawyer, a smug man named Weller, was known for burying small claims under piles of paperwork until people gave up. But I wasn't a small claims case. I was a federal judge, and before that, a Navy SEAL. I'd spent my life dealing with people who thought power could protect them from justice. Karen Holt was about to learn the difference between a neighborhood rulebook and the law. That night, I went home and walked the property, my son's crushed flower bed still scattered across the yard, his wheelchair's tire marks etched into the soil. I picked up the small, blue flower he'd planted himself, the one Karen had tried to yank up. It was bent but still alive. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. The next morning, I filed 2 reports, one to the county sheriff and one directly to the district attorney. I included the footage, witness statements, and a detailed account of Karen's past HOA abuse. I didn't just want her fined or reprimanded. I wanted her exposed. By the end of the week, the story had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Someone leaked that the judge who lived on Willow Creek Road had filed charges against the HOA president. Neighbors who'd once been too afraid to speak finally came forward. They told stories of harassment, trespassing, and threats. One man showed me a recording where Karen said, "This is my neighborhood. You people just live in it." Meanwhile, Karen tried to do damage control. She called an emergency HOA meeting, blaming misunderstandings and claiming that I was using military intimidation to scare her. She went door to door with flyers calling herself the victim. Then she made her biggest mistake yet. She sent a letter hand-delivered to my mailbox. Inside was a typed note on HOA stationery that read, "You're ruining this neighborhood with your drama. If your son wasn't always in the way, this never would have happened." My hands trembled when I read it, not from anger, but from something colder. Precision. The kind of calm that comes before a storm. I scanned the letter for fingerprints and handed it directly to Daniels. Within 2 days, she was charged with reckless endangerment, negligence, and harassment of a disabled minor. When the police arrived at her door, she tried to invoke her HOA title, as if it meant anything. "You can't arrest me," she said. "This is private property." Daniels smirked. "Not anymore, ma'am." The cuffs clicked around her wrists, and for the first time, the neighborhood saw what true accountability looked like. But for me, it wasn't over. Not yet, because behind Karen stood the entire HOA board, the people who'd let her run unchecked, who'd signed off on her intimidation, who'd let the monster grow. And if there's one thing the Navy ever taught me, it's this: you don't just take down the soldier, you take down the whole operation. The mission had just begun. When Karen was arrested, the neighborhood felt a strange kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a long storm. For the first time in years, no one was being fined for trash cans left out or grass growing an inch too tall. People started waving again. Kids played outside. It almost felt like freedom. But I knew that silence didn't mean peace, it meant fear. Fear from the rest of the HOA board, the people who'd enabled Karen for years. I'd seen this dynamic before, in war zones, in courtrooms, in every corrupt system where one tyrant hides behind a council of cowards. They were the ones who kept her power alive, who signed her letters, who silenced the people she bullied. I wasn't going to stop with her arrest. I wanted all of them. So I started digging deeper. Every HOA board has records, budgets, meeting minutes, enforcement logs. The law requires transparency, but this HOA hadn't filed anything public in 3 years. I filed a formal subpoena through the county clerk under my judicial authority, requesting full access to the HOA's records. The results made my stomach turn. The HOA had been illegally fining residents and redirecting those funds into a private maintenance account, which was, in fact, Karen's personal slush fund. Thousands of dollars a month were being siphoned into her bank account. Every unapproved mailbox, every non-compliant roof color, every $200 violation notice, it all went straight into her pocket. And she hadn't acted alone. Her treasurer, Mr. Wallace, was signing the checks. Her secretary, Mrs. Dunham, falsified the minutes to make it look legitimate. Even the HOA lawyer, Weller, had drafted amendments to keep their money untraceable. The deeper I dug, the angrier I got. They weren't just harassing neighbors, they were stealing from them. That night, I met with Daniels again at my kitchen table. "You sure you want to go this far?" he asked, staring at the stack of evidence between us. "You could let the DEA handle this." I shook my head. "No, the DEA will settle for fines. These people destroyed lives, Daniels. They preyed on old folks and single moms. They hurt my son. This ends now." We drafted a joint operation plan, part criminal investigation, part public exposure. Daniels would coordinate with the sheriff's office to seize the HOA's financial documents. I'd handle the legal motion to dissolve the HOA under state law, citing fraud, misconduct, and abuse of authority. The next morning, I called a special community meeting. I rented the town hall, printed out copies of every fraudulent check, every fake amendment, every approved fine that had funded Karen's vacations and backyard renovations. When people arrived, they were tense, nervous, whispering. But when I started showing them what their own HOA board had done, the whispers turned to gasps. I held up a blown-up photo of one check written to C. Holt, administrative fee, $4,500. "She took this from you," I said, my voice steady. "From your dues, your violations, your hard work. Every fine she ever sent was a lie, and every one of her friends on this board helped her do it." Then I showed them the footage, Karen pushing my son's wheelchair. There was silence, then outrage. One man stood up shouting, "We've been robbed. For years." Another woman sobbed, quietly, realizing she'd lost thousands of dollars to landscaping improvements. That never happened. By the time I was done, no one doubted what needed to happen. The community voted, unanimously, to dissolve the HOA. But the fight wasn't just local anymore. Within a week, news stations picked it up. Judge exposes corrupt HOA after disabled son injured in attack. Local HOA tied to embezzlement and fraud under criminal investigation. The cameras started showing up. The same neighbors who'd once been afraid to speak now stood proudly in front of their homes, telling their stories. And behind it all, I stayed quiet, letting justice move through the system. Karen tried to retract her confession. She claimed stress, said she didn't mean any harm, and that her medication made her act out. But the footage was irrefutable, and the financial records sealed her fate. When her trial began, she refused to look at me. Her lawyer argued that community management can be stressful and that she had been unfairly targeted due to a misunderstanding. But then I stood to testify, not as a judge, but as a father. "My son will never walk the same again," I told the court. "He can't ride his bike, he can't play catch, and he flinches every time a car drives by. That's not a misunderstanding. That's the cost of cruelty." The jury took 2 hours. They found her guilty on all counts: reckless endangerment, harassment, and financial fraud. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison. But what came after was even more satisfying. The HOA's property, its bank accounts, its vehicles, its assets were liquidated and redistributed to the victims of its corruption. Every homeowner got restitution. Every false fine was refunded. And the neighborhood finally became free. No more rules. No more intimidation. Just people living their lives again. One evening, I took Eli back to the yard. His new wheelchair was lighter, easier for him to move. The grass had grown back, and the flowers were blooming again, including the little blue one I'd saved. I planted it right back where it had fallen. "Dad," he said softly, looking around, "it's quiet now." "Yeah," I said, "that's what peace sounds like." He smiled, a real smile this time. "Karen's gone, right?" "Yeah, buddy, she's gone." He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Good." I put my hand on his shoulder, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Justice wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. And in that small garden, with my son beside me, I finally found both. 3 years passed after Karen's conviction. The neighborhood had changed. Fences once lined with violation tags were now covered in flowers. Kids rode bikes where no play area signs used to stand. People greeted each other again. And my son Eli was stronger than ever. He'd relearned how to walk using a brace and physical therapy. He even started volunteering at the local Veterans Center, helping others with disabilities find strength. Watching him rebuild himself from the ashes of Karen's cruelty made me prouder than anything else in my life. I thought it was all behind us. Until one autumn afternoon, I got a letter. No return address, no postage. Just slipped under my door. Inside, typed in bold, "You think it's over, Judge? It's just beginning." I knew that tone. The spite, the arrogance, the venom hidden behind politeness. It was Karen. Turns out, she'd been released early for good behavior. And now she was back in town. She couldn't live in our neighborhood anymore. The HOA was gone, and she'd lost her house. But that didn't stop her from lurking. People said she'd been spotted sitting in a gray sedan, watching from a distance. I wasn't scared, but I was angry. I reached out to my old Marine buddy Daniels, now working private security. "She's back," I told him, "and she's up to something." He just sighed. "They always come back." "What's the plan?" "The same as before," I said coldly. "We finish it legally, but this time no mercy." We installed cameras around my home, reinforced the gate, and warned the neighbors. Still, something in me knew. Karen wasn't the type to just threaten. She wanted chaos. She wanted revenge. And sure enough, it came. 2 weeks later, my son's new therapy center was vandalized. Windows shattered, files burned, spray painted across the walls in red. "Liars! You destroyed my life." The sheriff confirmed it. Fingerprints, handwriting, everything matched Karen's record. That was her mistake, because while she was busy trying to terrorize us again, she violated her parole, trespassing, vandalism, and harassment of a victim. I called the state attorney personally. Within hours, a warrant was issued. But this time, I didn't wait for her to come to us. Daniels and I drove straight to her temporary rental outside town. The sheriff's deputies were already surrounding the property. Karen was standing on her porch, wild-eyed, shouting that it was all a setup. When she saw me step out of the car, her face twisted. Half rage, half fear. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "My reputation, my home, my family." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, calm, deliberate, and said, "No, Karen, you ruined it. All I did was make sure the world saw it." She lunged toward me, screaming incoherently, but the deputies restrained her. They cuffed her, read her rights, and loaded her into the cruiser. And just like that, she was gone again. This time, the judge didn't show leniency. The vandalism, the threats, the parole violation, all stacked up. She was sentenced to 25 years without parole. The courtroom erupted in gasps, but I didn't smile. I just exhaled. Justice had taken its final breath. After the sentencing, I walked outside. The sky was pale orange, the same color it had been the day my son was shot. I looked down at him, taller now, braces still shining under his jeans. "She's gone for good this time," I said quietly. He nodded. "I know. Can we go home, Dad?" Home. The word meant something again. When we got back, Eli walked to the garden we'd rebuilt, the same one where I'd found him bleeding years ago. He knelt beside the flowers and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he looked at me and smiled. "She doesn't get to live here anymore," he said. "Not in our world." And he was right, because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silence after evil's last echo. I looked around the neighborhood, laughter from the park, dogs barking, the smell of barbecue in the air. Life had returned, stronger than before. And as the sun set behind the mountains, I finally allowed myself to feel peace, the kind no HOA, no corrupt tyrant, no Karen could ever take away again. I put my arm around my son's shoulders. "Let's go inside, buddy," I said. "Dinner's getting cold." He looked up with a grin. "Yeah, Dad, let's go home." And with that, we closed the door, for good, on the darkness that had once ruled our lives.